In a quiet corner of the city stood a small restaurant that had become a second home to many of its regulars. The place wasn't fancy, but it carried a warm feeling that made people want to stay a little longer after their meals. The lights were soft, the smell of roasted coffee filled the air, and the old piano near the window was more of a decoration than a working instrument. It hadn't been played in years, but people liked how it made the restaurant feel cozy. Among the small team working there was a young waitress. She was the kind of person most customers liked instantly. Polite, patient, and always ready with a smile, even when her feet hurt from walking all day. She worked long shifts, often staying late to help clean after everyone had left. She didn't complain much, not because her life was easy, but because she had learned that complaining never changed anything. She lived in a small apartment nearby, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of coffee and soap. Most mornings she'd wake up early, tie her hair neatly, and walk to the restaurant while the sun was still climbing. The streets were quiet at that hour, and sometimes when no one was around, she'd hum a tune to herself, soft, sweet, and a little sad. Music had once been her world, but that was something no one at the restaurant knew. Before life became all about work and bills, she had dreamed of being a pianist. She used to practice for hours every day, losing herself in melodies that made her forget everything else. Her parents couldn't afford music lessons, but a kind neighbor had an old upright piano and let her play whenever she wanted. She learned by listening, by feeling. Music wasn't just notes to her. It was a language she understood better than words. But dreams have a way of slipping away when life becomes heavy. When her father lost his job, she stopped her lessons to help with money. Then her mother fell sick and she took on extra work. One thing led to another, and soon music became something she thought about only in quiet moments. When the world was asleep, at the restaurant, her coworkers liked her but never really asked about her past. Everyone was too busy. The cooks argued over timing. The manager worried about the bills, and the servers rushed between tables. But she noticed everything, how people's moods changed, how they softened when a kind word was offered, how laughter could fill a room and make even tired hearts lighter. Maybe that's why customers loved her. She made them feel seen, even if she herself stayed unseen. Every now and then she'd glance at the piano near the window. Its keys were dusty and a few were chipped, but just looking at it made something stir inside her. Sometimes when she was alone after closing, she'd quietly lift the cover, touch a few keys, and then close it again quickly, afraid someone might hear. She told herself she didn't miss it, that those days were gone. But deep down she did. One Friday evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of office workers had come in to celebrate a promotion. Families filled the corner tables, and the sound of chatter mixed with the clinking of plates and glasses. The owner moved around nervously, keeping an eye on everything. It was supposed to be a good night, one of those evenings when the restaurant earned enough to make the week feel worth it. But just before dinner rush began, a problem came up. The man who usually played soft background music, a local pianist hired on weekends, had called to say he couldn't make it. He'd fallen sick suddenly, and there was no one else to fill in. The owner looked frustrated. "What am I going to do now?" he muttered, pacing near the counter. "People expect music tonight." The waitress overheard but didn't say anything. She was setting up plates, trying to keep the tables organized. One of her coworkers joked, "Hey, maybe you can play, right? You're always humming songs." She laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't think so. It's been a long time." The owner looked up. "Wait, you can play?" Her hands froze on the tray. "A little," she said softly. "But it's been years." He gave a half-smile, half-desperate look. "Well, we don't need a concert. Just something soft, background music." "Anything is better than silence," she shook her head. "I wouldn't want to ruin the evening." "Ruin it?" "You won't," the owner said quickly. "Just a few songs, that's all." The rest of the staff began to tease her gently. "Come on," one said. "You'll be fine. You've got this." She tried to brush it off and went back to work, but now her heart was racing. She hadn't played in front of anyone in years, not even herself. The idea scared her, but somewhere inside a tiny spark of excitement flickered. As the night went on, the sound of laughter and plates filled the restaurant, but the piano stayed silent. The owner asked her again softly this time. "Please, just one song. I think people would love it." She hesitated, then looked toward the piano. The soft lights reflected off its surface, and for a moment, she imagined herself sitting there again, her fingers finding their way across the keys. Something inside whispered, why not? After all, she had nothing to lose. So when the main dinner rush began to settle and people were finishing their meals, she wiped her hands on her apron and slowly walked toward the piano. A few customers noticed and turned their heads, curious. She could feel their eyes following her, and her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She pulled out the bench and sat down. The wood creaked slightly. For a second she just stared at the keys, her reflection faintly visible in their glossy surface. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keyboard. The air around her felt heavy, not with fear but with something deeper. The restaurant began to quiet down. Even the clinking of cutlery stopped. People waited, not sure what to expect. She took a deep breath, remembering the way her old teacher used to tell her. The first note is always the hardest. After that, your heart takes over. She pressed one key, and the sound that came out was clear but gentle, like the voice of an old friend she hadn't heard in years. Then another note, then another. Slowly, she began to play a tune she had loved as a child. Her hands moved cautiously at first, searching for memory, but soon something shifted. The hesitation disappeared. The sound grew smoother, fuller, and her fingers began to glide across the keys as if they remembered every corner of every melody. The chatter faded completely. Even the kitchen went silent. People stopped eating and turned toward her, their faces soft with surprise. The music filled every space in the restaurant. Not loud, not showy, but honest. It was the kind of sound that made people feel something without knowing why. For her, it felt like coming home. Memories she had buried under years of work and worry came rushing back. Late nights practicing by candlelight. The sound of rain outside her old window as she played quietly to herself. Her mother listening from the kitchen, smiling. She played not for fame or attention, but because she needed to, because it was the only way to speak the words she couldn't say aloud. When she finished the song, there was a pause, a deep, silent pause that felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder, growing until everyone in the restaurant was clapping. She turned around, eyes wide, a shy smile spreading across her face. Her coworkers were cheering. The owner was grinning proudly. A few people even stood up, still clapping. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly got up, bowing her head a little before hurrying back toward the counter. But inside, something had changed. That night, when the restaurant closed and everyone went home, she stayed behind for a few minutes. The lights were dim and the city outside was quiet. She sat at the piano again, touched the keys gently, and smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt alive again, like maybe her story wasn't over after all. The next morning felt different for her. The sun was brighter, and even the cold breeze on her way to work carried a strange warmth. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the night before. The sound of the piano, the way people had listened so quietly, and the applause that followed, it all played in her mind like a dream she didn't want to wake from. She smiled to herself as she walked through the familiar streets, her steps lighter than usual. It had been years since she felt that kind of joy. Not the kind that comes from something big, but the quiet kind, the feeling of doing something you truly love and realizing it's still a part of you. When she reached the restaurant, everything looked the same. The smell of coffee, the faint chatter from the kitchen, the sound of plates being stacked, it was all as it had always been. But when she stepped inside, everyone looked at her differently. The cook raised his head and said, "Morning star of the night," with a grin. The others laughed and clapped softly as she blushed, shaking her head. "Don't start," she said shyly. "It was just one song." "One song that made half the customers cry," said one of the servers. You should have seen their faces. Even that guy who never tips smiled for the first time. She laughed but didn't know what to say. It all felt unreal. The piano, the music, the applause, she wasn't used to being noticed. She was used to blending in, quietly doing her work and staying out of the spotlight. The owner came out from his office with a big smile. "You've no idea how many people asked about you this morning," he said. "We got 3 phone calls already. One couple said it was the most beautiful dinner they've ever had here. They want to know when you'll play again." Her eyes widened. "Again?" "Yes," he said with excitement. "I told them maybe next weekend. You can't say no. People loved it. She laughed nervously, her hands fidgeting. I don't know. I don't even remember half the songs anymore. Then remember them, he said kindly. We'll clean up early tonight so you can practice a bit if you want. She hesitated, but the idea stayed in her mind the whole day. Practice. It had been so long since she'd even thought of that word. That night after closing, everyone left except her. The lights were dim and the city sounds outside were fading. She sat at the piano again, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The melodies came back to her like old friends. Some songs she remembered fully, others only in pieces, but even the broken tunes felt alive again. For the next few days, this became her secret routine. After work, she stayed behind for an hour or two, playing softly to herself. The owner didn't mind. He even brought her tea sometimes and listened quietly from his office. The piano that had once been a silent decoration now filled the restaurant with warmth again. One evening, a regular customer stayed late, pretending to read while she played. When she finished, he walked over and said, "You know, I've been coming here for years. I've never heard anything that moved me like that." She smiled, unsure how to respond. He continued, "You have something rare. You should never stop." His words stayed with her. She didn't think of herself as someone rare or special. She just played because it made her heart feel full again. But hearing it from someone else felt strange, almost too good to believe. A few days later, the owner told her something that made her heart skip. "Remember that night you played? Someone filmed it. They posted it online. You should see it, it's getting attention." She was surprised. "What, who filmed it?" "Someone at the corner table. The video already has thousands of views. People are leaving comments, nice ones. They're saying things like, 'This girl plays from the heart and her music feels like home.'" She didn't know what to feel, nervous, proud, or embarrassed. She had always kept her life private. Now strangers were watching her play, listening to something that came from the deepest part of her. That night, she finally looked it up. The video was short, just a few minutes long, showing her sitting at the piano in her apron, the restaurant softly lit around her. The comments poured in. People thanking her, saying her music made them cry, made them feel peaceful, made them remember something they had forgotten. She covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. She couldn't believe that something so small, something she did without any plan, could touch so many hearts. The next weekend, the restaurant was busier than ever. People she had never seen before came in, some holding their phones, smiling when they recognized her. The owner looked thrilled. "Looks like we have a little celebrity," he joked. She didn't feel like one. She still served tables, carried plates, took orders, and cleaned up after closing. But every once in a while, the owner would ask her to play a song or two, and each time the crowd listened the same way, silent, completely caught by the music. As weeks passed, she began to notice something changing inside her. Playing the piano no longer felt like a memory from another life. It felt real again. It gave her a reason to look forward to each day. Still, she stayed humble. She didn't chase attention or money. She played because it was what she loved. But one evening after another full house, a woman approached her while she was clearing a table. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "I wanted to thank you." She looked up surprised. "For what?"
"For reminding me of something I lost," the woman replied.
"My mother used to play that same song before she passed. When I heard you, it felt like she was in the room again. I don't know how to explain it, but—" "Thank you," her throat tightened. "I'm glad it meant something to you," she said quietly. The woman smiled, touched her arm gently, and left. That small moment meant more to her than all the applause. It made her realize the power of what she was doing. It wasn't about being perfect or impressive. It was about connection. A few weeks later, a local music teacher came by. He had seen the viral video and wanted to meet her. He introduced himself after her shift, saying, "You have a natural gift, but more than that, you play with emotion. Have you ever thought about playing professionally?" She laughed softly. "I used to dream about that a long time ago. But life had other plans," he smiled. Maybe those plans were just waiting for the right time. He offered her free lessons just to help her find her rhythm again. At first, she refused. She didn't want to take advantage of anyone's kindness, but he insisted. "Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden behind a serving tray," he said. After a few days of thinking, she agreed. The lessons were challenging at first. Her fingers felt stiff and her reading skills had faded, but her passion was stronger than her fear. Every evening after work she practiced, slowly rebuilding what she thought she had lost forever. The teacher encouraged her, reminding her that it's never too late to return to what makes you feel alive. Months went by. The restaurant continued to flourish and her music became the heart of it. People didn't just come for the food anymore. They came for the feeling her songs brought. Some nights when she played, children would rest their heads on their parents' shoulders. Couples would hold hands and strangers would sit quietly, lost in thought. The owner often stood near the counter smiling proudly. "You've turned this place into something special," he told her one night. She shook her head. "No, the people did. I just play." But deep down she knew it was more than that. Her music had breathed new life into a place and into herself. One quiet night after closing, she sat alone again, her fingers gliding softly across the keys. The restaurant was empty, but she imagined all the people who had listened, smiled, and felt something because of her. She realized that her story wasn't about luck or talent. It was about rediscovery. About finding the courage to open an old door and step through it again, even when it's been closed for years. The waitress who once hid behind her tray had found her voice, not through words, but through music. And the world, which had once felt too loud and too hard, finally began to listen. The city had started to change for her. It wasn't that the buildings were different or that the streets suddenly became brighter. It was her heart that changed. The same roads she had walked every day to the restaurant now felt lighter, like life had placed a soft hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Keep going." Her music had become the soul of that little restaurant. Every weekend, new faces filled the room, people who had seen the video or heard the story from someone else. They came to eat, yes, but more than that, they came to listen. The piano, which once sat silent in the corner, had become the centerpiece of the place. The owner often lit a small candle on it before she began to play, saying it brought warmth to the whole room. She didn't think of herself as a performer. She still saw herself as a simple waitress who just happened to play sometimes. But for the people who came, she was more than that. She was a reminder of something pure, something real in a world that often moved too fast. Every time she sat down at the piano, she felt nervous at first. The same fear she had on that first night always came back for a moment. But as soon as her fingers touched the keys, it all melted away. The world outside disappeared, and all that remained was the music and the people listening. One Friday night, the restaurant was so full that some customers waited outside just to get a table. The air was warm, filled with the smell of baked bread and laughter. When she played that night, the music seemed to dance through the air, soft and full of life. A little boy sitting with his parents near the front table leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands as he watched her. His eyes were wide, full of wonder. When she finished, he clapped louder than anyone, his small voice shouting, "Do it again!" Everyone laughed, and so did she. Moments like that stayed in her heart. After her shift, she often walked home through the quiet streets, still hearing the echo of the notes in her mind. Sometimes she'd stop by the park near her apartment, sit on a bench and look up at the sky. The stars above seemed to hum softly, like they were listening too. She'd think about how strange life was, how something as small as playing one song could open so many doors. But not everything was easy. With more people coming to see her, expectations began to grow. Some nights she felt the pressure of it. What if I play wrong? What if I disappoint them? She'd think. Her hands would tremble a little before she started. She wanted her music to stay pure, not something she did for attention or applause, but something that came from her heart. One evening, while she was helping clear a table after a busy night, the owner called her over. "Someone wants to talk to you," he said, pointing toward a man near the door. He looked polite and well-dressed, holding a business card in his hand. "Hello," he said kindly. "I hope you don't mind me introducing myself. I'm a music producer from a local recording studio. I saw your video online, and I came tonight to see if it was really you playing. You have something special. I'd like to talk about recording a few songs. Nothing too formal at first. Just you and the piano." She stood there quietly, trying to understand his words. Her first reaction wasn't excitement, it was disbelief. "Me?" she asked. "I'm just a waitress who plays a little after work." He smiled. "That's exactly why people love you. You play with honesty. You don't try to impress anyone, you make them feel something. She took the card, thanked him, and promised to think about it. That night she could hardly sleep. She kept looking at the card on her table, wondering if it was real. The part of her that had once dreamed of a music career felt alive again, but another part of her was scared. What if she wasn't good enough? What if it ruined everything simple and beautiful about what she had now? The next day she told the owner about it. He listened carefully and said, "You don't have to decide right away. Just remember, the world found you because you were being yourself. Don't change that." Those words stayed with her. She didn't rush. She kept playing at the restaurant, pouring her heart into each note, and waited for the right moment. A few weeks later, she decided to visit the studio, not to make a promise, but just to see. The place was small but full of instruments and quiet energy. The producer greeted her warmly, showing her the piano she'd be using. It was shiny and beautiful, nothing like the old one at the restaurant. But somehow she missed the chipped keys of her familiar friend. He asked her to play something. Anything. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. The song she chose was one she had written herself years ago, when she was younger and still believed dreams could come true easily. The melody was simple, a little sad but full of hope. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. The producer's eyes were soft. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly what people need to hear." From that day, she began recording once a week after her shifts. She didn't tell many people about it, just the owner and her closest coworker. It wasn't about becoming famous or chasing success. It was about doing something that felt true. As time passed, the recordings started reaching more people. Her songs were shared online again and again, each one carrying a piece of her heart. She received messages from people she had never met, from students, parents, even older folks who said her music helped them through tough days. Some said they played her songs at night to fall asleep, others while working to feel calm. She read every message with disbelief and gratitude. It was strange. She had once thought her story was small, almost invisible, and yet it had reached people far away. Still, she never let it change who she was. Every morning she showed up at the restaurant on time, tied her apron, and greeted customers with a warm smile. She didn't see herself as someone special. She still helped clear tables, served food, and comforted tired coworkers with small jokes. But every weekend when she played, the crowd grew larger. Some people traveled from other cities just to hear her live. One night, the restaurant couldn't hold everyone, so people stood outside with their phones listening through the open windows. The owner later said, "I've been in this business for years and I've never seen anything like this." She smiled but said quietly, "It's not me they come for. It's the feeling." And she was right. Her music wasn't about showing skill, it was about heart. Every note carried the weight of her struggles, the quietness of her mornings, the hope she had held on to when life was hard. People could feel that truth, and that's what made it beautiful. One night after finishing her last song, she looked up from the piano and saw the entire room standing. Not just clapping, standing, some with tears in their eyes. The little boy from months ago was there again with his parents, smiling proudly. The older couple who always sat near the window held hands tightly. The owner stood near the counter, watching her like a proud father would. In that moment, she realized something powerful. It wasn't fame or recognition that mattered. It was connection. It was the way her music brought people together, how it filled a space with warmth and reminded them of something good. When everyone left, she sat alone at the piano again, tracing her fingers over the keys. She thought about how far she had come, from a shy waitress too afraid to play a single note, to someone who could touch hearts with her music. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "Maybe this is what I was meant to do all along." The city outside was quiet, the lights shimmering through the restaurant windows. She played one last song that night, not for the crowd, not for the internet, not even for her teacher or the producer. She played it for herself, for the girl she used to be, and for the woman she had become. And as the final note faded into the still night air, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful things happen when you least expect them. When you stop chasing and simply let life find its way back to your heart. The months that followed felt like a new season in her life. Everything around her was still the same. The restaurant, the streets, the routine. But inside, something had bloomed. Music had brought her back to herself. Each day she felt a quiet kind of joy. the kind that doesn't come from money or recognition but from doing what feels right for your soul. Her songs had spread farther than she ever imagined. People from other cities wrote to the restaurant asking if she would perform somewhere else. Musicians sent her messages saying they wanted to collaborate, but she never let any of it change her. She still showed up every morning with her hair tied neatly and her apron folded over her arm, greeting customers with a warm smile. To her, this restaurant wasn't just a workplace. It was the place where she rediscovered her life's meaning. The owner noticed how things were growing and suggested something new. "We should have a small music night," he said one evening. "Just you, the piano, and whoever wants to come. No cameras, no phones, just people listening." She liked that idea. The thought of playing not for fame, not for recordings, but for real people, the way it began, made her heart full. So they picked a night for it. Flyers were placed near the counter, and word spread quickly. The small restaurant that could hardly seat 50 was suddenly getting calls from people who wanted to reserve a spot. When the evening finally came, the place glowed. Candles flickered on every table, and the soft smell of baked desserts filled the air. The lights were dimmed just enough to make the room feel close and warm. She wore a simple white dress, nothing fancy, but it suited the calmness of the night. As she sat at the piano, she took a moment to breathe. The crowd was silent, waiting. She smiled shyly and began to play. The first song was slow and gentle, a tune she had written during one of her quiet nights at home. Each note carried a piece of her heart. People closed their eyes and listened, letting the sound fill the spaces between them. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment before soft applause spread through the air. She played again, faster this time, something light and joyful that made a few people sway their heads to the rhythm. For an hour she played one song after another, her hands moving as if they were guided by memory and feeling. But it was the last song that changed everything. She looked at the piano for a long moment before beginning. "This one," she said softly, "is for anyone who's ever given up on something they loved. It's never too late to start again." Then she started to play. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew stronger, deeper. Her fingers danced across the keys, telling a story of loss, hope, and rediscovery. Every note seemed to rise and fall like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Some people began to cry quietly. Others held hands, swaying gently to the sound. The music built to a point where it filled the whole room, not just with sound, but with emotion. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, the vibration hanging in the air. And for that one moment, the entire restaurant held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had paused. Then came the applause. Not loud or wild, but deep and heartfelt. People stood up, clapping slowly, some wiping their eyes. A few even came forward to thank her personally. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears she didn't hide. She bowed slightly, whispering, "Thank you." That night became something people would talk about for months. The small restaurant had turned into a place of music and meaning. People who attended said they could feel her soul through the keys. It wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. After everyone left, she stayed behind, sitting quietly at the piano. The candles had burned low and the night outside was still. The owner came over and placed a cup of tea beside her. "That," he said softly, "was something I'll never forget." She looked up and smiled. "Me neither." He sat beside her for a while, the two of them saying nothing, just listening to the silence that felt alive after so much music. Finally, he said, "You've changed this place. Before, it was just a restaurant. Now it feels like a story." She didn't know what to say to that, but his words stayed with her. Maybe that's what music does. It turns ordinary moments into stories worth remembering. In the days that followed, she received letters from people who had attended that night. One person wrote, "I came in feeling empty, and I left feeling whole." Another said, "Your music reminded me to pick up my paintbrush again after 10 years. Reading them made her realize that her playing wasn't just for herself anymore. It had become a bridge, connecting her to people she'd never met, people who needed a little light in their own lives. But as her music grew, so did her self-doubt. Late at night after the restaurant closed, she sometimes wondered if she could keep doing this. Could she continue to live up to what people now expected from her? She wasn't trained in a big academy. She didn't read music sheets perfectly. What if someday she made a mistake and everyone saw her as just an ordinary waitress pretending to be something more? One night when she was alone after closing, she sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, but she didn't play. The fear had crept in quietly. She began to think of all the reasons to stop, to stay safe, to keep her world small and predictable. Then she remembered something her music teacher had once told her. "You don't play to be perfect. You play to be real." She smiled faintly, wiping a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She placed her fingers on the keys again and began to play softly. Not for the crowd, not for the internet, not even for the restaurant, but for that scared part of herself that needed reminding why she began in the first place. The melody was simple and calm, like a lullaby for her own heart. By the time she finished, her worries felt lighter. The next day, she arrived early, humming a tune as she set the tables. When the owner saw her, he smiled. "You're here before me again. You must really love this place." She laughed softly. "I do. It's where everything started again." From then on, she decided to keep doing things her way. No pressure, no rush, just honesty. She continued playing at the restaurant on weekends and at the small studio once a week. Her songs became part of many lives, but she stayed the same person, humble, gentle, and grateful. One afternoon, a little girl came into the restaurant with her mother. She carried a small music book and waited shyly near the piano. When the waitress noticed, she walked over and smiled. "Do you play?" she asked kindly. The girl nodded. "A little. I saw your video. I want to learn like you." Something about that moment made her heart swell. She knelt down beside the girl and said, "Then promise me you'll never stop." "No matter how hard it gets." The girl nodded again, eyes bright. That night, as she played her last song, she thought about that little girl, and about all the people who might be inspired not just by her music, but by her story. How life had knocked her down, but somehow, through a simple piano and a small restaurant, she had found her way back to herself. When the final note faded into the night, the crowd sat in silence for a moment, their faces calm and soft. Then came the applause, steady, full, and warm. She looked around, her chest full of gratitude. In that moment, she understood something deeply. She hadn't just brought music back into her life. She had brought life back into her music. And though she didn't know where the road ahead would take her, one thing was certain. She would never again let fear silence the song inside her. The restaurant had never felt as alive as it did now. Every weekend, the small tables were filled with people who came to listen. The smell of baked bread and brewed coffee mixed with soft candlelight, creating a warmth that felt like a hug. The waitress had grown used to it, but every time she sat at the piano and began to play, her heart still beat faster. It wasn't nervousness anymore. It was a mix of excitement and gratitude, the kind that reminded her why she had started in the first place. Over the months, she had learned to trust herself. She no longer worried about mistakes or what people might think. She played because the music lived in her, and sharing it felt natural. The crowd had learned to expect honesty from her, not perfection, and in return they gave her something just as valuable, their full attention. One night, the restaurant was packed more than ever. A group of travelers had come from another city, having heard about her music online. A few of them had tears in their eyes even before she began, recalling videos they had watched late at night when the world was quiet and they felt lonely. The room was filled with the usual mix of families, couples, and regulars, all waiting with soft anticipation. She took her seat at the piano, hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. She looked around and noticed the faces of people she had come to recognize over time. The little boy who always clapped the loudest, the elderly couple by the window, and even a young woman who had been a regular for years, always smiling quietly as she listened. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys and the first note floated into the air. It was soft and gentle, carrying a warmth that wrapped the room in calm. Slowly, the melody unfolded, flowing like a river over the ears of everyone listening. It was a song she had composed herself, one that told the story of beginnings, endings, and the beauty found in the spaces between. As she played, she noticed a hush in the crowd. The way it had happened the first night she dared to play in front of strangers, but now it was different. She could feel them leaning in, hearts open, and it filled her with a sense of connection she had never known before. Every note seemed to tell a part of her life. The struggles, the long hours at the restaurant, the moments of quiet despair, and the tiny sparks of hope that had kept her moving forward. The melody grew stronger, flowing naturally from her heart. Tears glistened in some eyes, smiles spread across others, and a few whispered softly to each other, sharing memories the music had awakened. She felt a familiar thrill, the one that had come on her first night at the piano. Only this time it was steadier, more certain. She wasn't just playing a song. She was telling a story and everyone was listening. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. It was not the silence of waiting or uncertainty, but a silence that held respect and awe. Then came the applause, slow at first, then building into a wave of clapping, cheers, and shouts of appreciation. People stood up, some even crying quietly, others laughing softly, overwhelmed by the emotions the music had stirred. She smiled, bowing her head in gratitude. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, feeling the vibration of the room, the energy of so many hearts reaching toward hers. She realized in that moment that music was no longer something she kept hidden. It was a gift she could share, and the act of sharing it made it grow bigger, brighter, and more alive than she could have imagined. After the crowd settled down, she continued to play. Some songs were gentle and reflective, others lively and playful. The room was filled with a rhythm that moved naturally, never forced, always honest. And when she finally stood, her hands tired but her spirit light, she felt a peace she had never known. The owner came over, his eyes shining. "I don't know how you do it," he said quietly. "Every time you play, it feels like the room becomes something magical." She smiled softly. "It's not magic," she said. "It's just music and people who are willing to listen." The night ended and the restaurant emptied. She stayed behind for a while, cleaning up quietly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The room was dim, the only light coming from the candles she had lit on the piano. She sat for a moment, letting the quiet surround her. The city outside was still, and the echoes of the night's music lingered softly in the air. As she traced her fingers over the keys, she thought about how far she had come. Not just in skill, but in courage. The waitress who had once been too shy to play in front of anyone had become someone who could fill a room with sound, with heart, and with emotion. She had reclaimed a part of herself that she thought was lost forever, and in doing so, she had touched the lives of countless people. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A local newspaper contacted the restaurant, asking to write a story about her. They had seen her videos online and wanted to know more about the young woman who had captured the hearts of so many through her music. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want attention. She didn't want her story to feel like a spectacle, but the owner encouraged her gently. "People are inspired by you," he said. "If they can read about your story, maybe it will inspire them too." "It's not about fame, it's about hope," she agreed. The article described her as a waitress with a gift, someone who had rediscovered her music and shared it in the most human way. It spoke about her journey, the nights she played alone, the moments of self-doubt, and the courage it took to play in front of others. When she read it, she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. It wasn't about being famous. It was about her story being real, and that felt important. The days turned into weeks, and the attention grew slowly but steadily. Messages came from people she had never met, people who had watched the videos, read the articles, or simply heard about her story through word of mouth. Some shared their own struggles, thanking her for showing that it's never too late to pursue a dream. Others sent pictures of themselves playing instruments, inspired to pick up their own long-forgotten passions. Through it all, she stayed grounded. She never let the growing attention change who she was. She still served tables, poured coffee, and wiped crumbs from plates. She still laughed with her coworkers, shared small jokes, and comforted anyone who seemed tired or sad. But she also played her music more confidently, more openly, and more lovingly than ever before. One evening, as she finished a song, the little boy who had always clapped the loudest came forward with his mother. "That was amazing," he said, his eyes sparkling. "You make music feel like magic."